Welcome to Tipping Spears with Hannah Becker. Today's conversation promises to be an insightful one with remarkable guests. And whether you're joining us for the first time or you're a regular listener, so glad you're here. My goal is to bring you closer to the innovative leaders and thinkers shaping our future. And today, I am thrilled to welcome Todd Connor. Todd is the co-founder of Veterans for All Voters, an organization founded to give a voice and a platform for the military-connected community to address political polarization through election reforms and innovations. Todd is also the founder of Bunker Labs, a national entrepreneurship organization dedicated to helping the military-connected community start and grow businesses. Founded in Chicago in 2014, Bunker Labs grew to over 40 chapters across the United States before being acquired into Antelope Institute for Veterans and Military Families at Syracuse University in 2024. Todd's a former management consultant, a U.S. Navy veteran, and has held many leadership roles in the public and private sector. In addition to Bunker Labs and Veterans for All Voters, he's also the founder of the Collective Academy, a leadership development consulting firm, as well as Emerson House, a luxe retreat venue in LaPorte, Indiana. Todd holds a BA from Northwestern University, an MBA from the University of Chicago, and is the author of Third Shift Entrepreneur. Todd serves as a lead faculty for the President George W. Bush Veteran Leadership Program in Dallas, Texas, and is an executive in residence at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, where he is also an assistant adjunct professor of strategy teaching the Social Impact Lab. He has been recognized as a presidential leadership scholar, a Presidio Fellow, and is a thought leader on entrepreneurship, military veterans, and election reform. He serves on the boards of the National Civic League, National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers, First Women's Bank, Bunker Labs, and is a venture partner with the Academy Investor Network. Todd and his husband Andrew and their son Jasper live between Hyde Park, Chicago, and Northwest Indiana. Well, welcome to Tipping Spears, Todd.
Thank you, Hannah. Thanks for reading that bio. And it's great to be with you. And you could have kept it short, but I appreciate the extended version. But it's so great to be with you, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation with you and with the folks that are listening in.
Awesome. Well, can you get us started today by telling us where your story begins?
Where my story begins, the jumping off point probably for our conversation is as a freshman at Northwestern University when I sight unseen signed up for the Navy ROTC program, not having had any context about the military, not having ever really understood the distinction between the Navy and the Army, the Marine Corps. I think I was a young person, like so many who joined the military, who just wanted to do something bigger than myself, wanted to be of service, had sort of a commitment to the notion of America as a place that to whom much has been given, much is sort of obligated in return. And so just felt an obligation and a sense of excitement and opportunity, and joined on the spot. It was incredibly uninformed decision. I'll say like a very naive decision and a very impactful one for everything that followed suit. And so my time in the Navy was relatively short, about 4 years in active duty, a couple of years in the reserves, but it really, I think, defined my life and everything that came afterwards. And so, I know a lot of folks listening are in the process of thinking about their own transitions, and sometimes we're really strategic in those things, and sometimes we just sort of go with our impulses. And so I've made some impulsive decisions in my life. I've made some what I thought were strategic ones, and some of both in each bucket kind of turn out well, some don't. But I view that as a starting point for my life, and then, yeah, Chicago has always been home. I'm there now in a different context, on the other side of having gone to schools there, and now in a faculty role, and still continuing to try to figure out, what's next, which is sort of the theme of our podcast here. But also, I think even the folks that sort of have it seemingly, figured out, I think are also trying to figure out what's next and how to be impactful in the moment of their lives and the season that we're at as a country.
Mhm. So was there a particular event or person that served as a catalyst for your career?
There's been so many. I I often have looked to co-founders as
Mhm.
people that have given me great inspiration. I mean, it's interesting. I read a lot of books, and I think historically I'm always drawn to historical figures who have played an outsized role in the times in which they lived, and try to draw lessons from that. It's not always perfect, but I do try to read because I think there's, when you read a lot of books, you can live a lot of lives. And
Hmm.
and so I do draw inspiration from history and from the experiences of other leaders and try to contextualize in our times what leaders of previous times have faced and how they've kind of moved through those things. And so I do count as mentors people that have long since deceased, but nonetheless, their stories. Benjamin Franklin was sort of an original mentor of mine. Is sort of a patriot, but also an entrepreneur, and someone who fundamentally brought sort of like an innovation mindset in the sense of sort of joie de vivre, the founding of the country. And I think he, better than any sort of founding figure, encapsulates the entrepreneurial spirit of the United States of America. So, you know, historically, I can point to folks like Benjamin Franklin and others that have given some inspiration. And then contemporarily, it's, I draw inspiration from, I don't have, and this is often the model when we think about mentorship and people that are catalysts. I can't point to, of course, my parents, but I can't point to sort of a single mentor who paved the way for me. I can think of a lot of young people, frankly, who have less lived experience maybe than me, but who I nonetheless find great inspiration from. Every time I get in a room with people that are on active duty, I'm inevitably going to be the oldest person there in a lot of these, just at this age. And I get great inspiration from what 22-year-olds are thinking and how they're seeing the world, and their understanding of not only technology and sort of fluency with that, but like culture and a values orientation and a new way of thinking that I'm not anchored in. And so I, at any given moment, try to maintain accessibility with folks that are younger than me, folks that have entirely different experiences, different cultures, different races, lived experience. Um, because I think everyone's got something to offer. And I think you asked the question about professional life. I mean, nothing I've done professionally would be possible without friendships and relationships, both those that have been kind of titled as co-founder to the efforts that I've been involved in, Bunker Labs, Veterans for All Voters, but also even folks that I've considered to be partners. I think I've tried to always see humans in this kind of non-organizational view that like we're not army first. We're humans. We're humans.
Hmm.
You might be wearing the uniform. You might take it off. You might go work for PepsiCo. You might go work for USAA. You might go work for the federal government. You might go be a Republican. You might go be a Democrat. But like all those are kind of signs that we put on ourselves, and they're not sort of who we are. And so I try to see people for who they are, and I try to build energy and collaboration and teams wherever I go. And I think that's the only way to get things done. So um, it's sort of a non-specific answer, but I don't. Yeah, I try to. I think anytime you can get around people with good intent and of like mind and like heart, I think you can build teams and get things done. And I think the question of what organizations they represent to me has always been a little less material.
Yeah, that's such a great perspective. So I know every journey, has its hurdles. What are some of the biggest obstacles that you faced, in your career, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah. So um I've largely spent my career as a entrepreneur, social entrepreneur. Those titles can have sort of distinctions. I mean, but they're not particularly material. But no, I've largely started my own efforts and with others, and
Mhm.
and always with the support of others. Like it's never a singular journey. But and that being an entrepreneur presents sort of unique challenges. And the book Third Shift Entrepreneur is really, I wrote it very explicitly as a how-to manual for particularly folks coming out of the military to think about how do you start something, because there's a lot of freedom and possibility, and hard work in being an entrepreneur, which is in my view just, and Hannah, you're an entrepreneur. You're out here starting this podcast, running this podcast. That's entrepreneurial. To me, it's stepping into things that don't yet have a frame and taking something from nothing and making it kind of real in the world. And sometimes that's a for profit, sometimes that's a podcast, sometimes that's a movement, sometimes that's a not for profit organization, sometimes that's just a new initiative in the context of an existing organization, right? And so So taking a kind of a broader definition of entrepreneurship, but it's this notion that like you got a vision as to what could be, it doesn't exist yet, and you put the scaffolding together to make it real. And doing that is really hard because people don't have a mental model for what it is that you're trying to do. Um, but what I've learned with entrepreneurship is the more you do it, the easier it gets. And there is sort of a process and a methodology uh, to how things can come to life, from an idea or a conversation into something that then is real, that then supersedes you, that kind of becomes bigger than you. It moves beyond you. It's like you can't stop it even if you want to. And so there's a lot of, I mean, starting things from scratch there's a million hurdles. People don't have a mental model. You've got to raise money. You know, entrepreneurs suffer from this classic chicken and egg dilemma. It's like, well, how am I supposed to build a thing if I don't get any money? But how do I get any money if I haven't built a thing? Right. So there's all of these sort of chicken and egg dilemmas when it comes to starting things from scratch. How do I have an audience if no one's listening? But how do I get them to listen if no one's not in the audience? It's like, and so there's a million of those things when you start, and all of which I've experienced in lots of iterations. But all of it gets easier, and part of what's true in entrepreneurship, which is maybe different than corporate corporate roles. And when I say corporate, I mean more like institutionalized roles. But like with entrepreneurship, if it works and takes flight, the pace at which it can accelerate far exceeds anything that exists in a kind of a concretized enterprise frame. So like if an idea like Bunker Labs works, we can scale it to 40 cities in 3 years, which is arguably faster than a great idea inside of an organization like the United States Navy can't scale, sort of at that, at least not in that way, that fast. And um, so my metaphor for entrepreneurship, because you asked about hurdles professionally, there's a lot of hurdles when you start, and there's arguably fewer hurdles as it matures. Like a lot, like because what you get to do as an entrepreneur, like if the momentum is there, then you get to sort of participate in that momentum. And getting a car to start and move fast isn't nearly as hard as it is to sort of keep it fast. The laws of physics apply there, and I think, and that's an important thing for entrepreneurs to remember is like, it is hard to get things going, but if it works, then it's working, and the effort required, to keep these things moving is not what is required to get these things started. And not to mention, you can bring other people into the process, and other people can help you kind of keep the things moving. And so that's how I think about entrepreneurship. It's about the sprints that are required to kind of bring things to life, and then the effort and the hurdles in maintaining these projects are just significantly different, and arguably easier to keep these things moving.
Yeah, I really appreciate your description of kind of that entrepreneurial experience because I think that's so kind of disorienting too when folks are
Mhm.
coming from, especially a large organization, whether that's military, government, or corporate. You don't necessarily have the course charted for you. You got this idea and you think maybe it'll work, and then you realize, it's on you to make it happen. And there's so many I feel like it's like those algebra equations, but like everything's X's you're solving
Yeah,
for. Like
yeah,
so much unknown.
yeah. There's a ton of unknown, and I think and this is again why I wrote Third Shift Entrepreneurs. Like I wanted to illuminate stories.
Mhm.
And so the book is full of stories. I actually wrote it as a fictional narrative about a guy, and he's married and he's unhappy, and his wife's like, "What's your problem?" Like, figure, and it's like very much the experience that a lot of veterans go through is like, it's like they have a job actually. Like it's not about a financial crisis. It's about a psychological crisis of like, is this
Mhm.
all there is? Or like, I'm so much more talented than the environment is demanding of me, and I don't want to settle for mediocrity. Like, I think that's actually the crisis for veterans. It's not about the starting point for entrepreneurship isn't like I want to make $1 billion. I mean, for some it is. That's not my starting point, and it's not the starting point for a lot of veterans. The starting point is like I don't want to move at the pace. I don't want to move at this slow enterprise pace. I
Mhm.
want to move faster. I have bigger ideas. I want to set the conditions of my feeling of my potential. I don't want that to be limited or throttled by the fact that this organization doesn't move as fast as I am prepared to move. And so I think that's a lot of what inspires entrepreneurship is the challenge, the daring, the ambition of I want to move fast, and I have a vision about what I could be doing and creating in the world. And it's not about the sort of celebrity of entrepreneurship or the wealth that can come with that. It's really about the impact that you want to create and the creator's instinct to sort of take something that you have a vision for that has not yet been created and bring it to life. And so, but I think what's so hard for veterans, a lot of Americans, but in particularly military veterans, is they don't have a good mental model for how to do that. And they don't have a model about how to do that in the context of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of literature out there about starting businesses, but most of it, like, Peter Thiel and Zero to One and everything Steve Blank does and Lean Business Model Canvas, it's good stuff, but it's not about the human. It's about the business. So
Mm-hmm.
here's how a business gets, you know, customer product fit, founder fit, but here's how venture capital rounds work. Here's how you think about total addressable market and scale and all that stuff. But it's like the question for me was still always, okay, but how does Todd Connor do this? Because like
Mm-hmm.
I can't afford to quit my job.
Mm-hmm.
So you've already lost me on how to go out and raise a Series A round because I'm still wondering how do you pay your rent if
Mm-hmm.
you're doing this full time? So I found entrepreneurship literature to be inaccessible.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't find it to be helpful. It left me with just still a bunch of like foundational questions. If you don't come from wealth, which is, by the way, the story of a lot of the founders of the tech giants that we are famous, most of the .com is like these are kids that frankly, and it's an undertold story, come from wealth, which
Mm-hmm.
is fine. But they're not sort of leading with that admission when they go out and tell the story of the founding of Facebook. Like and I think the disservice to the military community, which is largely a community that does not come from wealth, is like, okay, but who's paying for you to live in, who's paying for the garage that you're building this thing out of in Palo Alto? Like that's still a question mark for me. And the answer is like someone's parents. So anyway, so I felt like we weren't giving an honest representation as to what entrepreneurship is in this country and how do real people without wealth start things in the context of their lives, their bills, their constraints. And there is a way to do it because I've done it. And so I wrote a book about how to do it. And that's why it's called Third Shift Entrepreneur, because the notion is like your first shift is your day job, which you need income. Maybe it comes in the form of like a disability payment from the VA. Maybe it comes in the context of like you're still working full time or you've got some way of working part time or virtually. Your second shift is the things that you need to do to support your family, like, show up as a human, be in your community, volunteer, live your life. And then your third shift is carving out that time after the kids go to bed, before everyone else wakes up, on your lunch break, in the nooks and crannies of your day, where you like build the next thing. And so I have a very different model about entrepreneurship, which is not putting all your chips, on the table, but is instead like de-risking it by building things in parallel, to your life. And I think that's what we don't I felt like that was missing in this sort of conversation about entrepreneurship is like you don't quit your job in order to start something. You ought to start something, see if it works, be patient with that, test it actively, and then as it begins to work, you're like, holy cow, this thing I've been building on my nights and weekends now is like making as much money as my day job. Now I can quit my day job. So you start something in order to quit something. You don't quit something in order to start something. And so anyway, that and like 1,000 other sort of small lessons are the things that I've kind of carried with me about how to think about innovation, entrepreneurship. And the reality is entrepreneurship in this country, and I'll get off my soapbox, but we're at an all-time low in this country. We're actually experiencing an entrepreneurship crisis in this country. Um, New businesses, new businesses are the source of net new job growth in this country. And so if you're not
Mm-hmm.
starting businesses, you're not expanding the economy. And after World War II, veterans came back and 49% of veterans started businesses, and they weren't, they weren't going to be huge companies. Most of them, they were going to, small things within the community, local banks, restaurants, auto body shops, etc. But that was sort of the engine that created the economy that we've enjoyed for the last 70 years. It's the source of most of what's the Fortune 500 today has its roots in the post World War II economy and the veterans largely that started those businesses and grew those businesses. And so even we think that we're a very entrepreneurial country, but because there's so much celebrity around startups,
Mhm.
and we have a president who was made famous from being the Apprentice show, and there's a big culture of entrepreneurship in this country, but the actual rates of entrepreneurship in this country are all-time low. And so I really think that if we're going to reverse that and unlock that, we got to give give the American people and veterans in particular a different way of thinking about it and a different playbook.
Yeah, I really appreciate your outlining kind of the discrepancy on, kind of the culture of celebrity entrepreneurship and then who's actually starting businesses. Because it's something I've been noticing, especially the last decade, is like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
not as many veteran entrepreneurs, like not sizable companies, maybe it's just concentrated in a few sectors, not things that are sustainable. And it's a great overview you provided of kind of what's happening in the landscape there and how not having this entrepreneurial activity impacts our nation, which I think is a missing piece for a lot of people. They don't realize, they think, oh, you start a business because you want to be, this tech billionaire. And it's like, no, I mean, we need you. We need you doing the small businesses. We need you, these
Mm-hmm.
businesses being grown, contributing to our communities and then kind of the nation at large.
Indeed, it's foundational, and capitalism is such a great is like a enormous engine for prosperity and impact
Mhm.
and freedom in this country. And we don't, I think we've become kind of equivocal about that. But and so yeah, and so we need veterans in a form of service of bringing their ideas to life. It's not only good for them. I think it sort of speaks to their own fulfillment, but I think it's a significant remedy for a lot that ails this country today.
So in 2014, he launched Bunker Labs, fantastic organization supporting veteran and military spouse entrepreneurship. Can you tell us a little bit about the process of, starting a nonprofit from scratch and how that worked?
Yeah, yeah. Well, yes, and it speaks to kind of what I was just sort of talking to you, which is the notion of entrepreneurship, which is like, you go out there and you build things, and I mean, what is foundational is, and this is, I'll sort of give this in the form of advice as well, but it's like we just didn't overthink it. Like the
Mhm.
first thing is, are there veterans and military spouses who want to start businesses? I don't know. I know I did, and I know I needed help, and most of what I needed was a community. And so our first thing was just a happy hour event in Chicago. Let's see who shows up. Let's promote it through the channels that we have. Let's tell our friends. And I think our first event we had like 30 veterans and military spouses show up who were just interested in starting businesses, or they were
Yeah.
small business entrepreneurs. And we thought, wow, this is the seedling of something that could be real. And to me, it's kind of like keep it simple, don't overthink it. So it's like, let's have a happy hour, see who shows up. Folks showed up. We started the conversation. What do we need? Let's build this for us. What do we need? What are our needs? Let's speak to that and serve our own needs, fill in our own gaps. And presumably, if we can do that for ourselves, we can do that for other folks. And that was very much the starting of it in Chicago. And then over time, what you figure out is like, okay, what's the operating model of this? How do we raise money? The way to raise money is you show the sponsors, hey, come to 1871 here in Chicago. Let me show you what we're doing. Like, come see it with your own eyes, right? So I alluded to the dilemma before of like it's chicken and egg. How do you build it? How do you get money if you haven't yet built it? Well, it's actually not a chicken and egg. The entrepreneur always goes first. The entrepreneur always has to build it first, and then customers, or in the case of a nonprofit, sponsors will see it. And then if they see it and it aligns to their strategy, then they will invest in it. And so we were able to get some good early support from like USAA and Comcast and JP Morgan Chase and others, Wintrust Bank in Chicago. Um, and we sort of scaled. And then the next thing the scaling happened because other veterans in the country heard about what we were doing in Chicago and said, hey, we're doing something similar here in Austin. And Sabrina Watwitz and Jonathan and Emily McMahon and Washington, D.C. and Dean Bunshu in North Carolina. And, the list goes on and on and on of leaders, just veterans who were interested in building an ecosystem in their community, reached out and said, hey, I'm interested in doing this. Mike Ertmer in Madison, Wisconsin. I mean, I could go on and on about the folks that reached out, Jake Tozier in Seattle, and we just said, yeah, here's the playbook. And what I love about working with the military community is there's so much trust.
Mhm.
And, I mean, sometimes we get it wrong, but a lot of times we get it right. Where it's like, hey, man, it's like late night phone calls. Hey, Emily, like, here's what we're doing. Rule one, don't embarrass us. Like, let's figure this out together. And we just would show up with this kind of unified front, even though legally it's like it's the Wild West when you've got 14, independent chapters that have their own legal status and all this stuff. It was messy, but there was so much trust and so much shared culture and joy and humor that we could sort of show up and be a unified front. So we scaled through a chapter model because of the leaders in the cities that took the mantle and ran with it, and we tried to give a sort of a unified brand framing, and that's how we got to scale. But it was trust, and it was shared culture, and it was a clear sense of the shared mission. And I think that speed with which we did it, I think was only possible in the military community. I think it would have been incredible. I can't imagine trying to do that with people that didn't have a foundational experience, a foundational set of values, a shared culture. I
Mhm.
can't imagine doing it outside of the veteran community. And we got the question all the time, hey, this is amazing. You guys did this in the military community. We're trying to replicate it in some other community. How do we do that? And I was like, I don't think you can, because you don't have that shared experience that veterans have. I can't imagine culturally trying to pull that off just amongst people that are like all, I don't know, some other sort of identity class or whatnot. I think it would have been really, really tough.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I remember stumbling along Bunker Labs programming years ago, and y'all had really, I mean, kind of launched a movement. I mean, when I think about, the increase in like military connected entrepreneurship in like 2015, 16, 17. I mean, I'm thinking Bunker Labs because I mean, y'all were really kind of on the front lines there driving that and supporting those who were engaged in it.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's a testament to the leaders, the volunteer leaders in the cities across the country, the staff, and then the participants. I mean, and part of what our ethos with this was never hierarchical. It was never like, we're going to teach you how to start a business. It was like, hey, we're all in this together trying to figure this thing out. And there was never, I mean, I always tried I mean, I probably got a lot I mean, understood the role as founder to sort of like give this thing the momentum it needs and tell the external story. But it was never about like, we have the answers and you need the help. It was always like, we are a peer community of people all in this together, all trying to figure this out. Let's all share our answers. And I mean, I would go to another city and I would just sit in the back of the room, try to learn the lessons that they were conveying and learn from others. And that always was how it was. It was like we never wanted that power, like a power dynamic or if anything, the pyramid was upside down and we were trying to kind of, learn from the community. And so I think it did feel like a movement. And I felt
Mhm.
like, because movements are catalyzed by the people in the movement, not the
Mhm.
leader. I mean, and so I think that it did feel like a movement and a community that like even as they were trying to figure their own stuff out was just so quick to lend a hand to other people.
Mhm.
And I think that's what made it so powerful. And the times change and the nature of entrepreneurship has evolved and Syracuse University had a more mature platform to kind of continue on programming. I mean, a lot of what it was interesting in 2016. A lot of the incubator spaces that were coming together, so much of that has evolved. WeWork was a huge it was a huge co-working model in that matured in 2020, went through some challenges, disruption. They're still around. They're a great organization, but it looks different. A lot of the incubator spaces like 1871 have gone away, and now they're kind of coming back in different and more mature forms. So it wasn't going to continue on as it had in the same way. And that's okay, but it did kind of catalyze a movement. And I think that, and I know because I continue to talk to so many folks that have come through Bunker Labs, like, even though Bunker Labs doesn't sort of exist in the same way as a brand and as an organizing model, a lot of it does, by the way, still through IVMF and Syracuse, but the relationships are still there. A lot of the entrepreneurs have been successful. Now they're thinking about, okay, how do I give back in a different way? A lot of those ecosystems have taken on a different life of their own within their community. And so and that's all good, even if the organization doesn't sort of exist in the same way, those relationships continue. The impact in the local ecosystem continues. People are still engaged in different ways. A lot of the entrepreneurs sort of saw themselves as part of this community, and they are now reinvesting in this community in a way that feels appropriate to the times and their capacity and talent and so forth. So um, yeah, it was just an absolute privilege to kind of ride that wave, and it continues on in different ways.
So, in your experience, working with thousands of entrepreneurs, what characteristics distinguish those who successfully build companies from those who, they struggle to get traction and they
Mhm.
don't see that progress?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll say there's something that I'll speak to two things. One is like sort of behavioral about the founder, and then the other is about sort of the market and the external environment, which is also kind of related to the founder. So the first thing with the founder is there's a tension that I think lives uh, in inside of successful entrepreneurs, which is they have like a dogged focus on the problem that they're trying to solve, like an unrelenting commitment to that problem, but a real intellectual flexibility about how to solve it. And so what I mean by that is you have some founders that, the mythology can be like they heard a hundred no's before they got a yes.
Yeah.
I don't think that's right. I think that's like unstrategic. I think the strategic founder says, I'm very committed to ensuring that, or I'm going to make something up, but like I see an opportunity for AI to be used in patient care in a way that improves the patient experience and shortens, uh, or decreases the risk of remediation or something like that. I don't know. Some, and so, okay, so that's like a starting point. Like, I really think that the patient experience is flawed or it's too cumbersome for the nurse or the physician or whatever. So you have an understanding of that and you have a real commitment to that. So the strategic founders really committed to that. And let's say that they build an initial prototype. Some founders confuse a commitment to the prototype as being the same as a commitment to the problem.
Hmm.
And the strategic entrepreneur is like, this is the prototype. But if it doesn't work, I'm going to scrap it. I'm going to build a new prototype. They're willing to rapidly work through the solution set while maintaining a real commitment to the problem. A lot of founders confuse those two things and they stay so committed to the solution that they're trying to sell, and they're not listening to the feedback that you might have identified a real problem, but this is not the solution that people want. And so you have to kind of hold those things in tension, which is an openness to the solution while maintaining a commitment to the problem. And what that looks like in the context of a startup business is like pivoting. It's like, okay, we started out as an AI platform focused on that, but we saw that the real need was around this. So we're pivoting and we're going to that. And good companies and for a company to sort of find its product market fit is going to have to pivot several times in the early days. And the question is the founder going to be strategic to see that and facilitate that pivot, or is the founder actually getting in the way of the pivot because they're too attached to the baby that they've kind of created? And so that's I would say, like in the experience of founders, it's founders that are really strategic, really understand the problem and maintain and are committed to that problem, but then maintain openness as to the solution. They don't get in their own way. And part of that is like, that's a leader who's self-aware. It's like, hey, the demand signals have changed. I know I was very focused on that before, but I'm not going to, I have a self-awareness to like, actually, that's not what's needed anymore. And let me pivot away from that. And that's hard for people to do because their self-identity gets in the way. And I kind of joke in some of the political work that we're doing now that I'm like, if you haven't ever quit your political party, I'm not sure that you have a mature definition as to what your belief system is. because I can promise you both political parties today don't look like what they did 10 years ago. So if you've just ridden that wave, I question whether you've got the intellectual capacity to sort of pressure test the identities that you've associated yourself with, and like, when did those identities cease to sort of actually align to who you are, or do you just kind of wait to get the definition from these external events and these external partners? And so entrepreneurship is a little bit the same. You got to do your own thinking and know if the demand signals aren't there. So that's one. The other is just timing. And are you thinking about the moment? Like, you might have had a great idea, but is it the right idea for the right time? And I think part of what I've, to the extent, Bunker Labs was successful and Veterans for All Voters seems to be working, it's partly because the timing of these things is right. And so a good entrepreneur not only has like a good idea, but understands that the timing of the moment. It's like, hey, launching a veteran entrepreneurship organization in 2014 was great timing. I wouldn't try to launch it today, not in the same model, because the environment's totally different. Now, there are other ideas that we need now. Veterans for All Voters is one of them. And so I think part of being strategic is, as an entrepreneur, is like knowing, okay, this is in fact the right time for this idea. And so you're maintaining kind of a sense of the environment, the timing, that like what is needed in this moment. And so you can call some of that's luck, right? Where like Bill
Mhm.
Gates 10 years earlier, Bill Gates 10 years later, he's a very smart guy. He's probably got an interest in computer science. He probably can't launch Microsoft 10 years earlier, or I will even say 5 years earlier or 5 years later. The timing's not right. So timing is important, and you could say timing is kind of beyond your control. I think some entrepreneurs just get lucky with the timing. I think strategic entrepreneurs have a good sense of timing and understand, okay, this is in fact the right time for an idea like this. So they're also kind of mapping to the timing and thinking about those things. So yeah, those are, I mean, a few thoughts. And then I think other things, I guess the last thing I'd say is like operational execution, and this is an area that entrepreneurs are great at, but brass tacks matter in entrepreneurship. Like, you can't be a good founder if you don't maintain your calendar, don't aren't responsive, aren't professional. Like, I think just being a person who does what they say they're going to do, puts in the time, puts in the effort, is responsive to people, sets up a regular rhythm, builds a good team, knows how to manage a team. Like, these things actually all matter as well in entrepreneurship. And I think that's something that, comes really naturally to military veterans.
Yeah, it's just very, very insightful, Todd. So I want to talk politics. So you are currently the co-founder of Veterans for All Voters, which focuses on reducing political polarization. Can you tell us a little bit more about what y'all do and, what inspired you to take on that challenge, at this time?
Yeah. So I want to say this before I get into it, which is, my view of this is not about a political outcome. It is like, stop. So I want everyone to suspend for a second their beliefs about, because the minute you say politics, we immediately go to Republican, Democrat,
Mhm.
President Trump, President Biden, and it's like, and all of that is a toxic caricature of what I want to talk about, which is a broader definition of like a representative government. Some people are anchored on the word democracy. Some people are anchored on the word democratic republic or republic. What I'm talking about is we don't have a system that is responsive to the American people. That feels very clear. I mean, it's just like, you overwhelmingly, it's like, is the political system working in this country? No, it is not. And the implications of that are profound, particularly for people on active duty. So I'm talking about a system level look at why is our system so dysfunctional, which is to say, there's a incentive structure that's at play that seems to reward social media behavior that we wouldn't tolerate in our own lives. It feels wildly, and frankly, it feels so inconsistent with the American people. I'm of the belief, and there's a lot of data around this, the vast majority of the American people are reasonable, good people. They're not internet trolls. They're not out there on X, like trying to be provocative. Like, they're living their lives. They're helping their neighbors. They're raising their kids. And our political system is a real distortion of, I think, where the American people are at. 80% of Americans agree on, 80% of issues, even the most controversial ones. They have like aligned opinion about reasonable sort of gun control, reasonable beliefs around, reproductive rights, reasonable beliefs around the role of Congress and the role of the Supreme Court and what we ought to be doing in foreign conflict and stuff like that. So the question for me is always like immigration reform. So why is Congress not doing reasonable things? Why don't we get a sense that the president, whichever president, working with Congress is just sort of moving reasonable things past the finish line? And the reason is, and I don't want to get into deep sort of lecture on this, but there's tons of data around this. 87% of members of Congress are in safe seats, which means they are not worried about losing their next reelection. And those seats are either solidly red or solidly blue. And so therefore, they don't worry about losing the general election. What they do worry about is the primary election, which is where only typically, less than 15% of voters vote. They're the most partisan. And the only way you're going to lose your primary election is if you do not toe the party line, literally. And so primary elections is unfortunately where most of the fights are had. Republicans aren't worried about losing to Democrats. They are worried about losing to other Republicans. Same thing with Democrats. And they're only going to lose if they're seen as being too soft. And the only way you're seen as soft is if you work across the aisle. So the very thing that the American people want, which is like work across the aisle to develop solutions that are in the interest of the majority of the American people, are directly adverse consequences if they actually do those things. They will get primaried, they will lose their reelection. So it's actually a very simple thing that's at play when you understand that that's the incentive structure. There's other things like money in politics and too many folks kind of in their 80s dominating our political system. So we got to look at age, we got to look at other things. But we ought to take a look at what our political system's doing. And so that's what Veterans for All Voters is doing. The American people are confused. There's so much toxic noise out there. They don't know where to find reliable information. They don't trust anything. But what's interesting is and Pew Research has done a big survey on this. The American people trust two people or two sort of classes of folks in particular. Number one is veterans, and two is small business owners. Because these are folks that are having to live in the reality. They live in reality. It's like small business owners live in reality. Veterans are living in reality. And so, generally speaking, active duty certainly are. So the Bunker Labs community is sort of the intersection of both these things. It's like small business owners who are military veterans who stand up and say, "Hey, there's a better way." And so we're building a platform for veterans to stand up and say, "There's a better way," and to talk about reforms that can move us beyond the political system that we have. That is, just to name it, it's absurd. It doesn't serve the American people. It's not normal. We should not accept it as normal. And the real tragedy here is young people growing up, this is all they've seen. So they don't actually know that that it could be different. And so we have to build a system that is different, which is not about who wins the next election. It is about changing the incentive structure so that it doesn't matter who wins the next election, that the people that win the next election are incentivized to do what the majority of the American people want, not build a social media following that raises a bunch of money that protects them as incumbents from a primary challenge, which is the incentive structure that most incumbent politicians are operating with. And so to do that, last thing I'll say, you have to go state by state. Every state controls how they conduct their federal elections. So you can't change Congress unless you change how every state elects their people to Congress. And that's a state by state task. It's not, you can't fix Congress from DC. You have to fix it from Springfield, Illinois, and Madison, Wisconsin, and Sacramento, California, and so forth. And so we're doing that, and we've got momentum. And where Democrats are in charge of the state, they are opposed to our efforts at reform. Where Republicans are in charge of the state, they are opposed to our efforts at reform because it looks like more competition, more frankly, participation from independent voters who are wholly excluded from this primary game. And that is the majority of military veterans. 52% of military veterans are not Republican or Democrat. They're actually independent. So you can't fix politics unless you get them involved, and you can't get them involved unless you change how primary elections in this country operate. So as you can tell, I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about this, which is why we started an organization. And that's, the last thing back to entrepreneurship is like, that's the freedom of being an entrepreneur. You can have a point of view and you take it out there into the world and you see if there's a reaction. And fortunately, we've had a great reaction. We've got 1,000 volunteers on board, and We're trying to change how states conduct their elections, and we're seeing some results with that. It's hard, but what we're doing now is not working, and it is not sustainable. So if you want to keep a government that serves the American people, you have to not just think about who wins the next election, but make sure that you got a system that is responsive to the American people.
Yeah, that's fascinating, Todd. It's such a good description of kind of what's going on behind the scenes. I think a lot of people are just not aware. So,
Yeah, and I get it. People are busy, people are living their lives. Like it's a privilege to get wonky on this, and I understand that people are like trying to just grasp. I mean, people are trying to live their lives and stay
Mhm,
healthy and take care of aging parents and get their kids
mhm,
to school. And then like, and what they think is like, God, I'll try to vote in November at the general election if I can. But like the sad reality for them is what they don't realize is like 87% of seats have already been determined. Like it literally November's too late. That vote doesn't matter. And that's the real tragedy in this country is like the general election. So few seats are even contested at that point. And so anyway, so we have to fix that. And it's a privilege to be able to work on it because most American people are, and certainly most active duty, like they're doing their job and they don't have a lot of capacity beyond that. And I don't expect them to, but those with capacity, to think and advocate and stand out there like veterans who are small business owners, we have an obligation to do that, and I take that pretty seriously.
the one thing that I always found so cool about the military is its ability to just bring together people, from every political, geographic, religious, socioeconomic background. I know when my first introduction with the military community, that's just one thing that stood out to me. It was like, oh my gosh, all these amazing people with these amazing perspectives. What unique, perspective does, our military community bring to conversations about, civic duty and, safeguarding, our democracy?
Hmm. What's amazing? I mean, when people think about the military community, they immediately think, okay, they're patriotic, and that's true. I mean, it's a group of people that have put the country above themselves, and so that's true. But I think almost more impactful is the fact that the military community, and this is very rare in our society these days, um, the military, every person that has been in the military has lived alongside people uh, who come from radically different circumstances than themselves. Like most people in this country, like they grow up, and if you live in a rural community, you're going to be surrounded by people of a particular political ideology. You actually, if you hear, and if you are, grew up in an urban environment, same thing. And so the other side is this like kind of foreign construct. And then you think, wow, they're really out to destroy me. If you've been in the military, you're like, oh no, I just know that that's not true. Because I know too many uh, buffoons who grew up in all kinds of communities that I've served alongside. By the way, I'm one of them, who come from very different life circumstances. They're just people. They're just people, and so there's this like humanity that cuts through, I think, the military because you're like, I know that the other side isn't evil. I know these people. I got friends. And that is a rare gift. And we don't live in a world in which a draft has been mandated, but after World War II, there was this great kind of social cohesion that we experienced as a country, which by the way, was really helpful for starting businesses. And that social cohesion was built through shared service. And so I think to me, it's almost as profound the fact that, someone that joined enlisted in the Air Force, having grown up in Detroit, lived alongside someone that grew up in Tuscaloosa, and they became friends. And if you have an unlikely friendship like that forged in the military, which everyone does, you know that that is possible at scale. And so I think that lived experience of being with folks very different from yourself culturally and otherwise, but forging friendships in that, understanding that the mission comes first, and that we are bigger than that, and frankly coming to this appreciation of the absurdity and the beauty of that service, is a really powerful touchstone to kind of return to, all throughout your life. And it has been for me, and it has been for others. And on top of like this sort of the patriotism, but I don't want to lose the patriotism amidst, because that can kind of get flayed with something. And it's really about living and working alongside people of a very different experience, and then understanding that there's kind of a larger picture at play, that what we're doing in service of the country abroad is important, and it should be taken seriously. And I think all too often Congress and the presidency, they don't take it serious. It's not deemed serious, and not enough people understand it at a lived experience level. So they kind of cast their assumptions about what they think it is, and they don't actually have that lived experience. And so that's problematic. So I think veterans bring a grounded reality to what this is and what this is not, and they come with this experience of having lived and worked alongside people very different than themselves.
So I know today, you serve as faculty in the Bush Institute's Veteran Leadership Program and teach at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. When you work with emerging leaders, and entrepreneurs, what blind spots do you see them, struggling with, today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think, and I'm struggling with these things too. We live in a world in which outrage is rewarded. So I think we're struggling to see models of leadership that are grounded in humility,
Mhm.
grounded in substance, grounded in, you know, joy even. I mean, I think, um, and so I think that a lot of folks are kind of growing up without sort of a model of leadership that feels human, grounded, substantive. Um, and so I think there's that. I mean, I think we're struggling. And then on top of that, there's this kind of, it's like there's a desire to kind of keep your head down because like no one wants to be a target, but also like, but we have a responsibility to lead. And so I think people are trying to find their way in that cross current. I'm trying to find my way in that cross current. Um, like does being um does being civically engaged have to mean being on social media, or can it show up in a different way that feels more authentic to who I am? So I think a lot of leaders are trying to figure out how to, their personal values feel grounded, and then they're kind of unsure about how to sort of show up in the public domain. And that is honestly why we built Veterans for All Voters, to try to give them a place to sort of show up, but not in a way that feels cartoonish or like you have to be a takedown artist. Like we can actually get together, know that we are real patriots, not this kind of performative version of patriotism, but in a way that sort of sees this kind of beyond that, like politics is not patriotism. Politics is politics, but like we are, a service of like what service to the country looks like is a healthy tension in which other voices get to be expressed. I'm not always going to win. That's not the goal. Is not my total victory. It's like actually about a system that lives in the tension of opposing views, which is what America is, and kind of respects that. And like it's like supporting the NFL. Like if I want to support football, and even though I'm a Bears fan, it's like my goal isn't that the Bears just dominate every season. Like that would destroy the NFL. That's actually not I mean, yeah, I'm cheering for the Bears, but like I don't want them to always win, because then like the whole sport loses the value, right? Like that's not the point. It's like we want the NFL to thrive, and every team to have its fan base, and once in a while an underdog wins, and that's can be celebrated even if it's not my team, right? So like I think that is lost in a lot of people in politics. I don't think it's lost in a lot of veterans though. That we understand. It's funny because we get on our calls, and I know people, we have very different political opinions, but we sort of set those aside to be like, this system, let's talk about how the system's performing. And then are the politicians in Oklahoma representing the voters of Oklahoma? And that's not going to look like what I want, but it damn better sure look like what Oklahomans want.
Mhm.
Right. And so that, like, I think for a lot of people, that's maybe like a hard cognitive thing to get your head around. It's not hard for veterans to be like, no, it's not about me win. It's not about my belief system being the dominant beliefs. It's about the voters getting in their politicians what is majority view of that place. And so that feels hard for leaders to kind of get their head around, but I think that's what I'm trying to help cultivate, is an understanding of that. And then this real sense that we're not going to get out of this mess that we're in, particularly in this poor models of leadership that we get displayed, just bad behavior, profanity, like this, the rest of it. It's so bad. It's like, I don't want children seeing what plays out in politics. It's embarrassing. I would not want my children seeing this. And so the antidote is like, we either fight in that same way, or we actually role model a different form of leadership. And so we're trying to role model a different form of leadership, one that is joyful, serious, substantive, committed to the American people. And I actually don't think that you fight fire with fire. I think fight fire with, oxygen, maybe, a different way of leading. And I'm trying to remind veterans in particular, like, hey, you gotta give your community a model of leadership that they're not going to see in politics because we owe them that. And we have to role model and be the role models for the kind of behavior that we hope to see.
That's such great insight. Well, Todd, I really appreciate you talking with me today. Do you have any final pieces of advice or parting thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience?
I mean, if you're tuning in, it's probably because you're wearing or have worn the uniform. So I appreciate you. And as it relates to this project of self-government, we do have work to do. So your service, I would just challenge you, doesn't end when you take the uniform off. Find a way to get involved that feels authentic to who you are, your values. Um, and we need more adults in the room as it relates to fixing our political system. And so I invite you to join us at Veterans for All Voters and find a way to be a leader, because people are so hungry for leadership. They're so hungry for hope. They're so hungry for something that feels like a solution, not just like help my gal win the next election. I mean, it's like we got to stop believing like this is the most important election of our lives. Like if our person wins, we're all safe. If our person loses, it's all over. That's not true. In fact, any of those messages are trying to co-opt you away from what we know to be a vision of America that is self-government. So the real solution is actually not about the person who occupies the seat the next election. It's actually about these oddball reformers. I'm one of them that are trying to like make sure that we shouldn't have to live in a world in which where we feel like it's an existential crisis who wins. We ought to feel like we go to vote and we're choosing amongst reasonable people that are there to serve us. And so and that either one we could live with. And so that's the world that we're trying to build. And I invite, if folks are compelled by that, come join us. We'd love to have you.
Well, thanks so much, Todd, for sharing your insights, your experiences. I know your contributions to our nation have impacted so many, and for that, we're very grateful. So thank
Thank you,
you.
Hannah. I've enjoyed this. Thank you so much for what you're doing.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Tipping Spears. I hope this conversation has sparked new ideas and challenged the way you think about our future. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, and we'll catch you next time with another exciting guest.